Good evening, everyone. My name is Pallavi Sharma. I go by the pronoun she and her. I'm a practicing artist and an independent curator and educator. I teach here at CCA in Critical Ethnic Studies program. I am very excited to host Catalyst for Change Asian American Narratives, a series of artist talk featuring San Francisco Bay Area Asian American artists, curator who integrate their identity, personal and community experiences, and address social and political issues through their work. We are very honored to have interdisciplinary artist and curator Rea Lynn de Guzman with us today. A very warm welcome to you, Rea. Thank you so much for coming here tonight. Looking forward to listen to you. This program is part of the Creative Citizens in Action initiative at CCA and is funded by an endowment gift to support the Deborah and Kenneth Novak Creative Citizen Series, an annual series of public programs focused on creative activism. Please let me begin with land acknowledgement. California College of the Arts campuses are located in Huichin and Yelama, also known as Oakland and San Francisco, respectively on the unceded territories of Checheneo and Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who have continuously lived upon this land since time immemorial. We recognize the historic discrimination and violence inflicted upon Indigenous people in California and Americas, including their forced removal from ancestral lands and the deliberate and systematic destruction of their communities and culture. CCA honors Indigenous people, past, present, and future, here and around the world, and we wish to pay respect to local elders, including those of the lands from which you are joining us virtually today. If you are unsure of whose land you are currently residing upon, we encourage you to visit native-land.ca. Thank you. Now, I would like to introduce our guest artist, Rea Lynn de Guzman. She was born in Manila, Philippines. She immigrated to the United States at the age of 14. She received her MFA from the School of Art Institute of Chicago and her BFA from San Francisco Art Institute. She has exhibited work in the US and internationally in Australia, India, and the Philippines. She was Kearny Street Workshop's APAture Visual Arts featured artist in 2017. In 2019 and 20, she curated Wonderwoman and Wonderwoman 2, a group show series featuring Bay Area-based immigrant women artists of color. She has been featured in the Asian Journal magazine, Pinay, KQED Arts, and the San Francisco Chronicle, among other publications. She also appeared on television interview segment with NBC Bay Area's Asian Pacific America with Robert Handa in 2017 and recorded a podcast interview with Making Ways in 2018. She teaches at the DeYoung Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco, City College of San Francisco Extension, San Francisco Center for the Book, and Root Division, where she served as the organization's first Filipina Teaching Artist Fellow in 2017. The screen is now your area. Please note that we will have 45 minutes of presentation by Rea, and it will be followed by 15 minutes of question and answer session with the audience members. Participants can submit their question via chat and are also welcome to unmute and ask their question in the question and answer segment. So please take over. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Pallavi. Thank you for having me in your class. And hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all here. Yeah, very grateful to be your first guest speaker. So I'm going to share my screen now and start my presentation. All right. So yeah, starting with this cover image here is actually an old drawing I've made back in 2010. I thought it would be an appropriate cover for this my lecture because it was a self-portrait I called Maria Clara Alter Ego. So it's graphite on paper. And back then I was already investigating the idea of Maria Clara, um, which is an ideal like, Filipina woman in the Philippines. And it'll make more sense later as I go through my work. So, yeah. So I first started, my first series was my Duyan series. So when I first started doing art, I focused more on oil painting, figurative oil painting, and I used myself a lot as a model in my work. I was investigating, exploring my culture. Basically, I was born in the Philippines and then I moved to the US when I was 14 with my single mother. So I carried a lot of those cultures from the Philippines, and then I started learning the new culture here in the US as a teenager. And in my early art background, I was drawn to this basket. The figure myself is in this basket called Duyan. So it's a kind of a cultural um, basket in the Philippines for infants. It hangs in the house like a hammock. So it's a basket cradle for babies. It would hang it in the house and the mother would sway it back and forth, and it's kind of soothing for the baby. And when I was going through old family photo albums, I saw myself as a baby in one of these duyans. So I used that first, this object, and I would go back and forth to the Philippines for trips. And one time I saw a duyan being sold in the street, and then I bought it and brought it over and kind of was drawn to the object itself and used it in my work. So I made more oil paintings of this, used myself, my body in relationship to this duyan. I was also curious with the weaving of this. It's actually, I think, made from bamboo. So the weaving of it was very curious to me. And it kind of became a metaphor of my cultures that are woven together.
Mm.
So I also started painting it with San Francisco in the background and then myself in the Duyan. Just kind of exploring that as a beginning. So here's another one. And after that, I was curious and wanted to make my own duyan. So using my materials, my art materials, my 2D materials, I was using acetate um, and image transfers, and acrylic that I painted on something flat and I cut it up into strips and then kind of made my own basket using those materials. I was using a lot of magazines that I associated with American culture, like for girls growing up in the US. I looked at a lot of those teenage magazines, fashion magazines like Marie Claire or 17, those kinds of magazines were really interesting. And they had a lot of ads for makeup and fashion, how you're supposed to dress. And I thought, oh, this must be a way to learn how to assimilate to this new culture. So that was my younger self thinking that way. And so this is another duyan that I made that was more deconstructed. So I used those materials from ads, and then I created another duyan and I deconstructed it and reconstructed it into a new form. And then I also started making collages using those fashionistas and those models in the magazines. and kind of recreating a scene that's a bit surreal. So it's influenced by my memories of childhood memories in the Philippines and then the new culture here. It's very colorful, and I was curious about those kinds of fashion that I saw, and the hair, the makeup, and all that. And then I would make a collage, and then collage. I would go through old family photo albums as well, and I would collage my young face from when I was a little kid, and then collage it onto the models. This one's called Touring the Motherland. It's also somehow inspired by my trips to the Philippines, going back and forth from here and there. And so this is a drawing of the Remnant. Um, and then I started thinking about the duality of self and how within yourself there's always a duality happening, and how I related that to my culture and also your younger self and your older self. That's what I was thinking about in these drawings. And yeah, so I was also making collages and then using that as my resource for these larger scale paintings. So I would make a collage first and then do some image transfers, use family photo albums of either myself or my relatives and friends. And I started playing around the juxtaposition of the outdoor space and then the indoor space and how you can blur those lines. So a lot of my old paintings, the outdoors might represent the Philippines and memories of that. And then the indoor space is more ambiguous, and there's still a lot of remnants from the past that linger. So they go in and out. So I wanted to play with space. And here, I think I went to the Philippines and went to a trip where I saw the rice terraces, and I was really drawn by that spectacle of nature. And so I used it for the mural of a wall space in this. And I started playing with diptychs as well to emphasize that duality. And yeah, I was doing a lot of image transfers with magazines of accessories like the fashion, the shoes, and all the bags. Accumulation of things that I thought was very American. And then, yeah, within my work, to go back and forth the 2D and the 3D. Um, and so these were also inspired by my trip to the rice terraces and seeing that landscape and using materials like my acrylic and image transfers directly from the magazine. And these little houses here were like the souvenirs that I brought over from there. And then these wood you see here are also remnants from I would build my own panels back then. So these are little leftovers from that, and that I would repurpose and play with. So I was drawn to color, drawn to the magazines, the glossiness of it, and the materiality of wood and souvenirs. Here's the detail. So I did all these works after I graduated from my undergrad at the San Francisco Art Institute. I had 3 years in between. So I had 3 years off after undergrad, so I did these. And then after that, I went to grad school, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And so I started doing more research about my work and about what's important in my interest. And so I started thinking about language. And so I was researching what was language like in the Philippines before colonialism. And so I found that there was a language called Baybayin before the Spaniards came and kind of modified that language, and it's changed since then. So we lost our original language, but it's still there. So you can still find the characters, you can search it online and through books and see what they look like, but don't believe that it's still spoken. You can just see them and make art out of them. So I was inspired by that, and I drew the characters and then I cut them out, and then I kind of made a sculpture out of them, clusters of them, and then I formed it all together, pop riveted it, and then made a projector out of it. So I put a light source inside there and I hung this. And from doing that, it projected a lot of characters all around my studio, which looked really beautiful on the floor and the walls. And so I started tracing these. They become abstracted and almost translated in a way. And so I started drawing these out, tracing them, kind of trying to preserve it and finding the beauty in that abstraction and coloring it myself. And then I also did a screen print on muslin. This is one character I called Scroll of Innocent Mistranslations. So it's a reflection on how this specific language has changed over time and has been modified, translated into something else, and it's lost, but somehow it's still there. And these are from that series still. And this one's called Masked and Unmasked Letters. Basically, what I did was I traced some of those shadows that were projected, and then I masked it using masking fluid. So I protected those areas. That's why you can see that the light areas are unpainted, so those are masked. And then I just painted the background and then added more ink and shadowing. So I guess in a way I was trying to protect those characters and seeing what happens. And from that exploration, I was also curious about the idea of Maria Clara. So Maria Clara is a literary figure from a book called No Limitangere. That was written by Jose Rizal. He was a Philippine national hero. So this is from, I believe, 1898. So in the book, there was a literary figure, female figure called Maria Clara, which kind of became the ideal Filipino woman. And there are a lot of traits associated with Maria Clara. So one of it is she's very meek, religious. You can see the clothing is very colonial looking. It's inspired or influenced by the Spaniards. So yeah, there's just a lot of things that became associated with Maria Clara. She's supposed to be obedient and quiet, subdued. And the character itself also became a metonym for this dress that she's wearing. So the dress is also called Maria Clara. And the dress itself is made out of Pina fiber woven with silk, and the undergarment, there's also muslin in there. So I started exploring that idea further. And I know that I also became drawn to the history of the pineapple in the Philippines, because I knew that the fabric is made out of piña fiber and it's so unique, specific to the plant. So this is the pineapple here. So it was brought over by the Spaniards to the Philippines probably back in the 1400s, and they brought it from another colony in South America. So from a colony to another colony. And it worked really well in the Philippines because the climate it grew there. So now the Philippines is the largest producer of pineapples in the world, more so than Hawaii. So it's this kind of reddish pineapple, what you see here. And then the leaves is where you would get the fiber from. And I visited this area in the Philippines. It's a very labor-intensive process where you would get the fiber from the leaves, and it's all hand done. Not all of the fiber makes it, so they kind of go through a process. They pick the finest fiber and then they soak it in water, they wash it.
Is the word bastos? Is that?
there's the first initial process. And then they, right here, before this, they kind of bleach it under the sun. So the sun bleaches it and it looks like blonde hair. It becomes white. And then you go through this process of untangling it and making a really long strand out of it and then connecting it together. So this is, yeah, very labor intensive. And then after that's done, when it's ready, you can now weave it into a cloth. So that's what's happening here. So that's going back and forth, that's one strand. So that's the process of it. And because it's so labor intensive, Pina fiber, it's expensive. And basically it is, you know, a lot of upper class women and officials would wear that dress. So it's associated with upper class women. And also Maria Clara, the literary figure, is Mistiza, meaning she's half white. She's half Spaniard and half Filipina. And so she's regarded as higher status and more beautiful. So the beauty standards really relate well to this idea of Maria Clara. And yeah, so I was drawn to the idea of the pineapples and the materiality of muslin and silk and Pina fiber. So at first I made this called Perspectival Perceptions 2014. So I was doing silk screen on muslin and synthetic organza. So instead of using real silk, I was trying to emphasize the fakeness of this idea that's been imposed on Filipino women for a long time. And so I wanted to use, instead of real organza is just the same as silk. I was using fake silk. And here's an installation I did called Pina Offerings. So it will make more sense why there's a bunch of eyeballs on the pina, on the pineapple there. I also was reminded, I remembered that there are some legend stories in the Philippines when I was a kid that really became more visual again to me, I remembered. And there's one thing called the legend, the pineapple legend. So the story of how the pineapple came to be. And I'll say that like in a brief way. So this is called the pineapple legend in Tagalog, ang alamat ng pinya. Maybe if you're from the Philippines, you might know this story. So it's about a little girl and her mother. And so the mother works really hard and does all the chores, and then the little girl is kind of spoiled. And so the mom does everything for her. But then one day the mom got sick, so she couldn't do anything, all the chores. So then she asked the daughter, if she could help out. And so she asked the daughter, can you make me a soup so I can feel better? And the daughter just made a bunch of excuses because she didn't know how to do it. So she would say, I can't cook the soup because I can't find the pot, or she would just say she can't find things. So then the mother, out of anger, cursed the daughter and said, I hope one day you will wake up with many eyes. So that was the curse that she said. And then the next day she couldn't find her daughter, but instead she found this foreign looking fruit in the shape of a head with many eyes. So that's the legend of the pineapple. So that's why I was drawn to the eyes, the eyeballs, and just that story I thought was really interesting and scary at the same time. So that's why I was doing this, the pineapple. I used my own eyeballs in this silk screen, and it's very ghostly as well. So I started thinking about more translucent material, more fabric, evoking that kind of ghost-like nature. And then these synthetic wax sculptures, I was thinking about, so I used my face and I made a a cast of it, and then I also casted a bunch of pineapples. I had a lot of pineapples in my studio that I casted and then added the texture here. And I was interested in wax because of its relationship with religion. So I was thinking about candles in a church, because I grew up Catholic when I was younger. When I was a kid, I went to an all-girl Catholic school, and the Maria Clara idea was very imminent from that experience. So I was thinking about the materiality, and I was thinking about it's like the consumption of what was given to us. Do we consume the pineapple? Do we puke it out? So I was questioning all those things. Do we become the pineapple? Hold on, I have to escape again. Sorry about that. And my share screen stopped working, so I'm gonna share screen again. All right, here we go. So I also wrote the story of the legend of the pineapple on the organza, and you can see it there. It's not very obvious, so it's embedded in there in a subtle way. Because I really like that storytelling nature too. So there's some image transfers in here where I wrote the story of the legend of the pineapple, and it's in there. So you could read it if you wanted to, or you could just look at it. So these are image transfers in acrylic, and then there's abaca fiber in there as well. Here's a detail of the image transfer of a pineapple on the left, and then another one on the right, but it's more abstracted and it's kind of broken apart. And so after that, I was inspired to make a giant sculpture. So the dress, I was still thinking about the Maria Clara dress. And the most interesting feature of that dress is it has a huge butterfly sleeve. So if you know Imelda Marcos or have heard of her, she used to wear that dress all the time, and she has these really fluffy butterfly sleeves. And so I wanted to make one singular, giant, large-scale Pina fiber sleeve. And so I used abaca fiber, which is a fiber from, I think, banana leaves that's native to the Philippines. So I was, playing around with a native fiber versus the colonial fiber. And then this pattern here is from Abaca Podcast. So each one of it has the texture of the pineapple, and it's inspired by a grave marker. Like I was researching what was art like before colonial times, which is so hard to find because a lot of it has been destroyed and it's hard to really know what that is. So this one I found was architectural grave marker in the Philippines pre-colonial times, and it's specifically for a woman. So I used that design for that. And then after grad school, I kept working through this, the concept, and somebody let me borrow a Maria Clara dress. And so I photocopied it, I Xerox copied the dress, and then I image transferred it onto the synthetic organza. And I specifically picked the brown ones and the white ones. So I photocopied it there and sewed it together just to create this. And when I have this installed, it's floating, so it feels very ghostly. And here's the detail. And it inspired me to create a whole series that I call a retazo, meaning fabric remnants series. And I used brown paper, and I just picked different parts of the fabric from the dress and played with it and made either monoprints or image transfers with acrylic. So it's more mixed media. And then I mounted it on different panels. And here are some drawings I did on Yupo paper, just playing around with my materials and seeing what I can evoke out of it. And the Yupo paper I like because it's very non-porous and it's translucent. You can see through. So just playing around with that. Here's some more of my Retazo series, where on the left side it has the sleeve again, and then the right side is the shawl part. And then I started incorporating the Pina fiber into the piece. So you can see that there's some streaks there, that's the Pina fiber. So I started doing image transfers on there and collage and layering more. It's not that obvious, but on the left side, I also started incorporating some soaps. So there's a couple soaps in there called Mistiza, and the other one's papaya skin whitening soap. So I remember when one trip in the Philippines, I was looking for soap, and it was so hard to find just a regular soap that wasn't for skin whitening. So I found these soaps and I used the packaging from it and copied it and used it for collage and image transfer. And I related that to the idea of Maria Clara and how she's a mestiza and she's regarded highly because of that, and how there's a lot of colorism happening in the Philippines. And when you have whiter skin, it's supposed you're seen as more beautiful. So I'm playing around with that, the power dynamics within that and why. So trying to challenge that. The other piece was called Bleached. So here's a couple more with Pina fiber and image transfers of the Maria Clara dress with acrylic. And on the left side, we started incorporating this piece of clothing called barong. So the Maria Clara dress has a male counterpart, and that's the barong. That's what the men would wear. So then I thought I could play around with the gender as well. Here's a detail from that. And I also added some Pina fiber in there. So yeah, I started experimenting with making image transfers on the Pina fiber itself. And so, yeah, that series lasted for a few years. I did it, I think 2015 to 2019, 2018. And then during the pandemic, I started kind of turning back to nature and playing with materials again. So, and color. I was always drawn to color early on. So I started making collages and just playing around. Yeah, being inspired by nature and textures and creating something abstract. So I started doing some collages. And then I started painting again as well. Just appreciating nature a lot more, especially during these times. So that's what I've been busy with during the pandemic. And then, yeah, creating more. I kind of had a collage face as well. But this, the woman figure keeps reappearing again in my work. Before, I would make collages, but not really think of it as my final piece. I would just use that as kind of a sketch, something to look at, reference, and then I would make a painting from that. But now I'm using collage and I think of it as a final piece already. I can see my process through there. Okay, so my presentation stopped working again. So I'm gonna stop share and do it again. Sorry about that. But yeah, now I'm going to talk more about my curatorial practice. So I've shown you my artwork and my journey as an artist. So now I'm gonna talk about Wonderwoman. So all that, my work inspired me to curate a show, and I wanted to focus on women of color, immigrant women of color, because I feel that they're very underrepresented. Whenever I go to a museum, it's always so hard to find women artists, let alone women of color artists and immigrant artists. So I wanted to make a show that really highlight these talented women artists that are often overlooked. So I thought of Wonderwoman. And I know that we are short on time, so I'm just gonna briefly go through these artists. The first Wonder Woman show was shown at Root Division here in San Francisco. It's a nonprofit art organization. And one of the artists here is Pantea Karimi. This is called Suspended Healing Garden. And here's a detail of that. And I can just maybe quickly read something I wrote about her work. So Pantea Karimi's Suspended Healing Garden evokes personal memories from her upbringing in the city of Shiraz, Iran, known for its herbal medicine tradition. So that's what inspired this work. And then next to her work is Cynthia Brandval, called Continents, and she used vintage and antique textiles. So it's a beautifully textured, large-scale triptych covered with monochromatic vintage and antique textiles. Continents engages with identity as a terrain imagined from memory, nostalgia, and culture in flux from forced and voluntary migrations. And there was also, so there was an opening and then there's a closing reception where artists activated the space with performances. And here we have Takako Matoba and Minuj Zamoradinha. They collaborated and did a performance with a projection where they spoke their specific languages from their motherland, and they also engaged with the audience. So they asked the audience to hold some of the ropes while they performed. And here we have Greta Liz Anderson. She called this performance nomadic. She walked around the gallery and wrote notes on the wall, and she also made this garment she's wearing here, and she would cut out a piece and leave it in those areas wherever she wrote. That's part of herself, so it's like she's leaving behind some parts of herself. And then here we have the mail order brides, 3 artists with Rayan Immaculata Estrada, Eliza Nenning Barrios, and Jennifer Baby Wofford. So Immaculata, the ones in those names are their mail order brides' names. And we have Bahara Kalegi and Benas Kalegi, sisters that collaborated on this soft sculpture, which they also activated with a performance. And upright is Elena Patino's work. I think it's called Colorful Migrations. So yeah, the mail order brides, you probably know them. They're a Filipino-American artist trio known for their use of camp and humor to explore issues of culture and gender. MOB conflates a once common stereotype of Filipino women as mail order brides with an acronym suggestive of an organized crime organization. And for this show, they debuted their Mananang Google recruitment video. So it was headed by an all women of color CEOs with a mission to organize the world and make it universally accessible and useful. Here's the performance by Bahara Kalegi and Benas Kalegi called Eternal Laughter, where she wore the soft sculpture. Basically, she just laughed for 5 minutes. And there's also Trinidad Escobar. She did a literary reading from excerpts from her graphic memoir called Crushed. And this is Pallavi Sharma's Megdu the Cloud Messenger mixed media installation, where she also activated with a performance with Shai Lahad Dixit. So this performance is called Sorry Not Sorry. They use the backdrop, the cloud messenger as the backdrop, and yeah, the duo wore masks and traditional saris, evoking a double consciousness that seems to negotiate an abstract conflict of assimilating to a specific culture and language, yet repudiating it at the same time. That was my thought behind it. This is Sam Cortez. Also did a performance. This was the last performance from that show called Fallen Dreams. It's a highly charged inspirational piece. Cortez attempts to break out from the inside of a large cage, which he built, made with wire and wood, using only his bare hands and feet. It takes Cortez several minutes to deconstruct the cage, and when he finally breaks free, Cortez walks away while the audience cheered. And there's also some interactive work by France Viana called Ube Trade. So she asked the audience to write down memories of food from their culture or from their family, and in exchange for that, she would give them an ube treat. So ube is a purple yam from the Philippines. So this is what happened. The audience would write down and they would talk about it and they get a treat. So she did this throughout the whole show for 2 hours. And so this is now going to Wonderwoman 2, which happened last year during the start of the pandemic. I proposed a show with APIC and SF Cameraworks, so APIC, Asian Pacific Islander Cultural Center, and SF Cameraworks they partnered with them, and I curated a show. So it was more it was more photo-based work, photographers, because it's for SF camera work, but I wanted to push the boundaries and go beyond just photography. This is Ainur Gergen-Weston from her Synchronicity series. This is Pallavi Sharma, Soliloquy. And also because we weren't able to hold the show in the space because of the pandemic, we ended up doing a Instagram takeover where each artist took over the Instagram. I made a Wonderwoman Instagram page and each artist posted their work for a week or something like that. And towards the end, we culminated with a live stream artist talk and presentation, which I'll share with you the link and you can watch it. So this is Minush Zumaradinia. She also performed in the first Wonderwoman show. And Kiana Honarmand. And Casey Jung. This is her work from 21 Gram series. So she's a photographer, but she's makes sculptures out of the photos. And I think it's really interesting. This is Joyce Nojima and Pamela Ibanez. She works with textiles and patterns. So up there is actually from a barong, upper right hand there. She's a photographer as well. And this is Kimberley Acevedo Teches from her Bodiless series. And we have Mido Lee, photographer, and Azin Seraj. So here's the link. If you want to see the artist talk and presentation that we did, you can hear directly from the artists and their works. So that's the link up there. And you could also follow us on Instagram at wonder_woman_artist. Or if you want to learn more, you could also, everything's on my website. So that's it. Thank you so much again for having me. Thanks, Pallavi. Oh, and I think you're on mute.
Thank you so much, Rea. That was so illuminating. You started from early works, and even you covered up your curatorial practice, which is just fantastic in this short 45 minutes of presentation. At this time, I would like to switch off the recording so that we can move over to question and answer session. But before we switch off, I would like to thank you on behalf of Creative Citizens in Action Initiative for joining us today. Thank you so much.